The rain poured outside as the little girl, no older than 7, held tightly to a worn leather briefcase, her small fingers trembling in the cold. She stood outside the gleaming glass doors of one of the city's most prestigious corporate towers, her face set with determination despite her size. As she entered, the receptionist, startled by her youth, hesitated for a moment before signaling her to the elevator. At the top of the building, in an office that could command the attention of even the most powerful, stood Samuel Davidson, billionaire CEO, hardened by years of cutthroat business. He had seen every kind of executive walk through that door, but never one quite like her. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'm bringing you another story just as interesting and unforgettable as this one. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now let's dive in. Ava Mills didn't belong in the corporate world, at least not in the way the world typically understood it. She was small, too small to be here, in a skyscraper where the elite gathered to negotiate multi-million-dollar deals. But she wasn't here for power, wealth, or prestige. Ava was here for a much simpler reason, though no one would guess that just by looking at her. Her shoes, too big for her feet, scraped against the marble floor as she walked toward the receptionist's desk, her briefcase in hand. She was the picture of a child playing dress-up, her frilly white blouse, a navy skirt that brushed the floor, and a too-tight blazer. Her father's blazer, to be exact. Behind her, the echo of her small steps faded, but the heaviness of the situation she was walking into grew with each one. Ava's mother, Clara, was in desperate need of a heart transplant. The doctors had said she didn't have much time. Ava had spent countless nights trying to process the idea that the person she loved more than anyone in the world might be slipping away from her. But today, this day, Ava was on a mission. It wasn't just her mother who was suffering, but her entire family. Her father had been gone for a year, after the accident that left Clara on life support. So now it was up to Ava. She had to help. Clutching the worn briefcase close, Ava whispered the words her mother had taught her. We never give up. At 45, Samuel Davidson had built an empire. His steel gray eyes were sharp with calculation, and his jawline was tight, a reflection of decades of discipline. Samuel had worked his way up from nothing, coming from a poor family in a small town, where he had to learn early on that the world didn't care about your dreams. It only cared about results. A ruthless businessman, Samuel had a reputation for being unyielding. He had a team of assistants who shielded him from unnecessary distractions, and every decision he made was cold, logical, calculated. His office was a reflection of his personality, sleek, minimalist, and devoid of warmth. Today, as he stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching the skyline stretch out beneath him, he could feel the weight of a meeting that would change the direction of his company, but he didn't expect it to change his life. When his assistant told him there was a young girl who had a scheduled interview, Samuel's immediate thought was that it was a mistake. He had no time for mistakes. The door to his office opened, and the receptionist's voice echoed in his head. Ava Mills is here for her interview. Ava. The name barely registered as he turned to face the door. But when she entered, his eyes narrowed, surprised by the small figure that walked through. She wasn't what he was expecting at all. Ava's world was built on fragility and hope. She lived in a world of love, of fragile moments held together by promises, where the mundane was meaningful. Every time she heard her mother's voice, every time she felt her heartbeat, was a reminder of what could be lost. The weight of her mother's illness was unbearable for a child, but Ava had learned to carry it with grace. It was the only thing that made sense anymore. Samuel's world, on the other hand, was constructed of steel walls. He had never had the luxury of worrying about such things as family. His parents were distant, busy with their own battles, and he had grown used to the idea that success and survival were two sides of the same coin. Trust was a commodity he didn't have time for. Vulnerability, even less. Samuel didn't know what to say at first. His gaze flicked over Ava's tiny frame, the oversized blazer, the frizzy hair that fell out of place. She looked almost comical, standing there in front of him with such seriousness in her eyes. Ava didn't waste time. She approached the desk, placed her briefcase on it, and looked up at him, standing as tall as she could. "Mr. Davidson," she said, her voice small but firm, "I need a job. My mom, she's sick. She needs a heart transplant." Samuel's mind raced, the words not quite sinking in. A job? For someone like her? What could a little girl possibly offer to a billionaire CEO like him? As Ava spoke, Samuel felt a strange unease settle in his chest. There was a deep, raw sincerity in her eyes, something he hadn't seen in years. But then the words she had said cut through the fog of his confusion. "My mom needs a heart transplant." His gaze softened for a moment, a rare flicker of humanity. He didn't know why, but the mention of a transplant hit him harder than he expected. Ava wasn't just another child looking for attention, and she wasn't here for play pretend. This wasn't a game for her. And in that instant, Samuel realized that she wasn't just fighting for a job. She was fighting for her mother's life. Before Samuel could even process everything, the door opened again, and his assistant stuck her head inside. "Mr. Davidson, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but the board meeting is starting soon." Samuel glanced back at the assistant, then at Ava, a strange discomfort still in the air. But Ava wasn't waiting for him to tell her what to do. She had already turned, clutching the briefcase close, ready to leave. "Please, just a minute," Samuel said, surprised at the urgency in his own voice. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Ava stepped inside, her briefcase now clutched tightly against her chest. Samuel hesitated for a moment at the office door, still unsure of what to make of this encounter. But something tugged at him, a curiosity, an unfamiliar pull. His mind kept returning to the words Ava had said. "My mom needs a heart transplant." The receptionist who had greeted Ava moments before raised an eyebrow as the girl entered the elevator, seemingly alone. But just before the doors closed, Samuel was quick to follow, his shoes clicking against the polished floor as he rushed to catch up. He didn't know why, but there was something that told him he needed to know more. Ava didn't notice him approaching. She stared down at her briefcase as if it held the answer to all her problems. "Wait, Ava." The girl's head snapped up, startled. She didn't expect him to follow. Her small frame stiffened, and she shuffled back slightly, almost as if she wanted to run but had nowhere to go. You want me to leave?" Her voice cracked slightly, though she quickly cleared her throat. Samuel was taken aback. He hadn't expected the vulnerability in her voice, the hurt that laced her simple words. This wasn't just some corporate routine for her. She wasn't pretending to be something she wasn't. She was carrying the weight of a dying mother on her shoulders, and it had nothing to do with an interview or business. It had everything to do with survival. "No, I want to understand. Why did you come here? What kind of job were you looking for?" Ava hesitated for a long moment before finally answering. "I need a job, Mr. Davidson. I need money for my mom's transplant. The doctor said she doesn't have much time, and I have to help." Her words were simple, but they hit him like a punch to the gut. He had heard of people in desperate circumstances, but something about the way she said it, so matter-of-factly, struck a deep chord within him. Samuel's mind raced. A heart transplant. The idea of a life being saved by a procedure so delicate, so expensive. It was beyond his comprehension, something that belonged in a world far removed from his. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a stirring in his chest, something that wasn't calculated or rational. He thought of his own life, his own mother, who had passed away years ago, and the way he had tried to distance himself from feelings like these. He had been so consumed by the pursuit of wealth and success that he had neglected the more important things, human connections, empathy, and yes, even love. I didn't realize you were talking about something like this." Ava nodded solemnly, her small hands trembling as she gripped her briefcase tighter. Her eyes, though young, reflected a strength he couldn't ignore. For a moment, there was no billionaire CEO standing before her, no powerful man whose decisions shaped industries. There was just a man, faced with the rawness of human suffering, and a little girl who had more courage than he could fathom. "I don't want to be here for long. I need to do something. Mom's all I have left." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Samuel swallowed, trying to push back the unsettling emotions that were rising in his chest. "You're not alone, Ava." He wasn't sure why he said it. He didn't usually speak like this, but the moment felt too real, too personal to remain detached. I'll help you, but we need to find another way." The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into the plush lobby. But Ava, despite everything happening in the world around her, couldn't take her eyes off Samuel. She had heard the words, but they didn't make sense. A billionaire CEO offering to help? It felt impossible. "What do you mean? How can you help?" Samuel stood frozen for a moment, looking out the tall windows that framed the skyline. His heart, which had always remained an impenetrable fortress, now seemed vulnerable. The city below looked so small, almost inconsequential in the face of what Ava was going through. All the success, the wealth, it didn't matter. "We'll figure something out. We'll get your mother the transplant she needs." Ava blinked in disbelief, unsure whether she had heard him correctly. "You really think you can help me?" His gaze met hers, the sincerity in his eyes undeniable. This wasn't about business. This wasn't about contracts or stock prices. This was about something more profound. "I don't know yet, but I'll make sure you don't have to go through this alone." Have you ever found yourself in a situation where the person you least expected stepped in to help? What do you think would happen if people reached out and offered a hand in times of need? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Ava stood there, processing his words, feeling a rush of emotions she didn't know how to manage. Her mother's life was hanging by a thread, and yet here she was, standing in front of a man who had the power to change everything, who had the resources to fix it. But was it even real? Was it possible for someone like Samuel to actually care about her and her family's situation? Samuel, for his part, knew he had crossed a line he hadn't even realized existed. He was a businessman, yes, but today he wasn't dealing in deals. He was faced with a child's plea, and despite his best instincts, he couldn't turn away. As they walked out of the building together side by side, the weight of the world seemed just a little bit more bearable. As the days passed, the initial rush of emotion faded, leaving behind a quiet unease in Samuel's chest. He had told Ava he would help her, and for a moment, the words had felt right. But now, in the cold reality of his world, they seemed harder to keep. The more he thought about it, the more the weight of her situation bore down on him. He was a man who had spent his life protecting his empire, his wealth, his power, his carefully crafted image. And suddenly, this child, this small girl, was asking him to step outside those lines. He had always prided himself on being in control, on managing every aspect of his life with precision. But now, Ava was making him question everything. He had tried to stay detached, to treat the situation as another project, another obstacle to overcome. But there was no strategy to this, no negotiations or terms. It was simply the truth. A little girl's mother was dying, and Ava was fighting with everything she had to save her. And then there was the money. His wealth, while vast, didn't come with the type of ready solutions that would make this easy. A heart transplant wasn't something you could simply throw money at, and no matter how many doctors he had on his payroll, no amount of power could change the fact that Ava's mother might not survive much longer. In his sleek office, Samuel pored over hospital reports and medical data, his fingers clenching tighter around the pages with each passing minute. He had done his best to try and separate himself from Ava's struggle, to view it with clinical detachment. He didn't want to get emotionally invested. It was dangerous. It was messy. But deep down, he knew it was already too late. The child had already gotten under his skin. Meanwhile, Ava was doing her best to hold it all together. Her mom's condition had worsened, her breaths shallower, her face more pale with each passing day. Ava could see the fear in her eyes, fear that Clara didn't want to show her daughter. Clara's smile was strained, as if it could hold off the inevitable if only she tried hard enough. Ava had been doing everything in her power to keep hope alive, to be the pillar of strength that her mom needed, but the weight of it was starting to show. Ava hadn't been able to focus at school. She couldn't concentrate on anything except how she might be able to save her mom. The dream of getting that job, of getting Samuel's help, was still fresh in her mind. But even now, a nagging doubt lingered. What if Samuel had only said those words because he felt sorry for her? What if he wasn't serious? Her thoughts often wandered to the times her mother had told her stories about the people who helped them when things got tough. People who weren't afraid to reach out when it seemed like there was no hope left. But Ava wasn't so sure anymore. After all, the world had a way of letting people down, especially people like her. People who had nothing but love and hope to offer. Samuel stood at his office window looking down at the city below, his eyes scanning the busy streets, but not really seeing them. His mind was elsewhere, occupied with the memory of Ava's face, her sincerity, and the weight of her words. He had thought about calling her, but something held him back. It was one thing to offer help in the heat of the moment, when emotions were raw and urgent. It was another to follow through, to take responsibility for someone else's life, especially when that life was so intricately connected to his own. For all his success, Samuel had always kept people at arm's length. It was safer that way. Relationships had always been transactional for him. But now, Ava's situation was forcing him to confront something deeper, something he had buried for a long time: vulnerability. He thought about the way his mother had passed away, how he had been distant, too focused on his work to notice that she was slipping away until it was too late. That pain had shaped him into the man he was today, a man who didn't get attached, a man who didn't rely on others. But Ava was different. She wasn't asking for pity. She was asking for help. And despite every instinct telling him to stay away, to remain detached, Samuel couldn't help but wonder if, for once in his life, he should just stop running. The phone rang, breaking the silence of his office. Samuel looked down at the screen, expecting another business call. But when he saw Ava's name flash on the display, he froze. His finger hovered over the button to answer, but he didn't press it. He wasn't ready to have this conversation. He let the call go to voicemail. And yet, even as the voicemail beeped, he felt a wave of guilt wash over him. How could he have done that? How could he have ignored a child in need? But then the rational part of his mind kicked in. You can't save everyone, it told him. You can't fix every problem. Ava stood by the phone, her fingers trembling as she stared at the screen. She had called Samuel for the first time, hoping, praying that he would follow through. But the voicemail felt like a slap in the face. She had heard the distance in his voice when they spoke last, but this felt different. This felt like rejection. She couldn't blame him. What did she expect from someone like him? Of course, a billionaire didn't have time for a little girl with a dying mother. Ava closed her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. The fear, the exhaustion, it was all starting to catch up to her. And the thought that Samuel might not be able, or willing, to help her hit her like a ton of bricks. Have you ever felt rejected when you needed help the most? How did you handle it? Would you have kept pushing forward, or would you have given up? Share your thoughts with us in the comments. The next morning, Ava's hope was waning. But deep down she knew she couldn't stop trying. She had to keep going for her mother's sake. And Samuel? Well, Samuel had a choice to make. He could continue living in his world of cold calculation and distance, or he could face the truth of what he'd promised. Either way, it was coming. The moment when he would have to decide, would he help Ava or would he walk away? The days following Ava's call were a blur of uncertainty. Samuel spent his time buried in meetings, negotiations, and the relentless demands of running his empire. But no matter how many deals he closed or how many board meetings he attended, his thoughts kept drifting back to the little girl with the tired eyes and the overwhelming burden of a dying mother. The gnawing feeling in his chest wouldn't go away. The unanswered phone call was like a weight, dragging him down, reminding him of the promise he'd made and the uncertainty that still loomed over it. But fate, it seemed, wasn't going to let him forget. It was a Friday afternoon when the unexpected happened. Samuel was in his office, sitting behind his imposing desk when his assistant burst into the room. "Mr. Davidson, there's an emergency." Samuel didn't look up from the papers in front of him. "What is it now?" "It's about Ava Mills. She's outside. She says she needs to speak to you." Samuel's brow furrowed. He hadn't expected her to show up at his office again, not after everything. His first instinct was to brush it off. But then, that weight, the one that had been sitting on his chest for days, returned stronger than before. Ava wasn't just any child. She wasn't the type to back down, to let things slide. She was persistent, maybe to the point of stubbornness. But he could never fault her for that. "Let her in." Ava entered the office slowly, her head down, her shoulders slumped. She was wearing the same oversized blazer and skirt from their first meeting, but now they looked even more out of place. Her face, once filled with hope, was now clouded with exhaustion. Her hair was slightly tangled, and there were dark circles beneath her eyes. Samuel stood up as she approached, his gaze softening, though he didn't know what to say. What could he possibly say to a child whose world was crumbling? I just wanted to talk to you, Mr. Davidson." Samuel gestured to the chair across from him. "Please, Ava, sit down." She sat, her hands tightly gripping the briefcase once more. Samuel noticed how small she looked in the vast chair, how out of place she seemed in his polished corporate world. And yet, here she was, taking up space in a room that he had filled with nothing but power and wealth. "What's going on?" Ava hesitated, her gaze shifting to the window behind him, where the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. "My mom, she's getting worse. The doctors say she doesn't have much time left." Samuel felt his heart clench. The last time he had heard those words, they had felt distant, like something that belonged in someone else's story. But hearing them now from the lips of this small girl made it all too real. "I don't know what else to do. I've been trying everything, Mr. Davidson. I even tried to get a loan from the bank, but they won't help me. I thought maybe you could do something." Samuel exhaled slowly. This wasn't like any situation he had ever encountered before. He was used to boardroom battles, to financial crises, to cutthroat decisions that came with high stakes. But this was different. This was personal. And there in front of him was a little girl whose entire world was falling apart, who was desperately clinging to whatever hope she could find. For a moment, the two of them sat in silence. Ava's eyes never left the floor, her fingers nervously picking at the edge of her briefcase. Samuel's mind raced. He knew what he could do. He had the means, the power. But would it be enough? Could anything truly be enough? "I don't know if I can help in the way you're hoping, Ava." Her gaze shot up, her eyes wide, pleading. "Please. I don't know who else to ask. You're the only one who can." The words hit Samuel like a punch to the gut. He had spent his entire life building walls, convincing himself that helping others wasn't his responsibility. He had never allowed himself to get involved in anyone else's struggle, not in a way that truly mattered. But here was Ava, showing up at his door with nothing but raw hope and desperation. "I can't promise you a miracle, Ava." Ava swallowed hard, trying to keep the tears from spilling over. "I don't need a miracle. I just need a chance." Her voice cracked, and Samuel felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, He didn't feel like the person in control of everything. For the first time in years, he wasn't the one making the decisions. He was just a man, standing in front of a child who needed him, and realizing, against all odds, that maybe he could do something about it. Samuel leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in front of him as he processed everything. He couldn't fix this all at once. He couldn't simply wave his hand and solve Ava's problems. But there was one thing he could do. I'll take care of the medical bills. We'll get your mom the transplant she needs. Ava's face went pale, and for a moment, Samuel thought she hadn't heard him correctly. You'll help her? Samuel nodded. He couldn't believe the words were leaving his mouth, but he knew they were true. I'll make sure the transplant happens. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I'll make sure you have what you need to save her. Ava's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time Samuel saw her for what she truly was. Not just a child, but someone who had carried the weight of a world far too heavy for her shoulders. She stood up slowly, and with shaky hands, she extended her small arms toward him. Samuel didn't know what to do at first, but then, as the reality of his decision settled in, he stood up as well, wrapping his arms around her in an awkward but genuine embrace. Have you ever had a moment where you took a chance on someone who needed you? What was the result, and how did it change you? Let us know your experiences in the comments. As they pulled apart, Ava's tear-streaked face was brighter than he had ever seen it. It wasn't just the hope of a transplant that lit up her eyes. It was the realization that, for the first time in a long time, someone had believed in her. Someone had chosen to act on the promise they made. And for Samuel, it was the beginning of something he hadn't known he needed. The line between business and compassion had blurred, and in its place was a new understanding, one that would reshape everything he thought he knew about success. The decision had been made. Samuel had promised Ava he would help her mother, Clara. He had taken the necessary steps, called his contacts, and ensured that the hospital would make space for Clara in their transplant program. But even as he made those calls, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting within him, something he hadn't expected. The very act of helping Ava, of stepping outside his cold, business-driven world, had awakened feelings he had long buried. And now, with the promise of saving Clara's life looming, he found himself asking questions he'd never dared ask before. What was it about Ava that made him want to keep his word, even when it didn't make sense? Why was he so moved by a little girl who had nothing but hope and desperation in her eyes? The answer, though elusive, seemed to haunt him every time he thought about Clara, every time he thought about Ava's mother lying in that sterile hospital bed, fighting for her life. There was something about the situation that felt painfully familiar. Samuel had always been a man of discipline and control, but his past was a different story. Raised in a small, run-down house in a quiet town, he had grown up with an absence of anything resembling wealth or privilege. His parents were hard-working but emotionally distant. His mother had been kind, but the emotional connection was always strained. His father, a mechanic, was even more removed. Samuel had never been able to get close to either of them. As a child, he learned to fend for himself. His mother had been sick for a long time before she passed away when Samuel was just 16. He remembered the days before her death, the hospital visits, the way she'd cling to him as if he were the only anchor she had left in the world. Samuel had spent so much time in his studies and extracurriculars, striving for success, that he didn't realize how quickly his mother had deteriorated. By the time he finally noticed, by the time he understood that she was slipping away, it was too late. The guilt had eaten him alive. He hadn't been there for her when she needed him most. He hadn't held her hand in her final moments. She had died alone, surrounded by machines and strangers. And the worst part was, Samuel had never allowed himself to truly grieve. He had stuffed the pain down, buried it beneath the facade of success. He channeled it into building his company, amassing wealth, and never looking back. After all, he reasoned, grief was an indulgence. There was no time for that. But now, watching Ava and hearing her story, the memories flooded back. He could see her in his mind's eye, the little girl whose world was falling apart, whose mother needed him. It was a reflection of what he hadn't done when his own mother had needed him. Meanwhile, Ava's life was anything but easy. The world had grown smaller and darker for her since her mother's diagnosis. She couldn't remember a time when life wasn't a series of doctor's appointments, hospital visits, and the constant worry that her mother might not make it through the night. When her father passed away in a car accident just a year ago, Ava had been thrust into a role she wasn't ready for. She had to become the strong one, the caretaker. But how could a child carry such weight? She didn't have the resources. She didn't have the experience, but every day she pushed herself harder. Her mother had always been the light of her life, the one who protected her from the world's harshest truths. She remembered how Clara would tuck her in at night, kiss her forehead, and tell her everything would be okay. But now, those words seemed like distant echoes, and Ava couldn't help but wonder if they had ever been true. It wasn't just the fear of losing her mother. It was the feeling of abandonment. Ava had seen the doctors' faces when they told her about the transplant. They were sympathetic, but there was nothing they could do without the money, without the proper care. She had watched her mother's strength wane, and no matter how hard Ava tried to keep it together, she was starting to lose the battle herself. But what terrified her the most wasn't the fear of being without her mother. It was the thought that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't enough to save her. She wasn't enough to make her mother's world whole again. After Ava left his office that day, Samuel couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was watching history repeat itself. A child, standing before him with nothing but hope, asking for something that felt impossible, a miracle, a life-saving transplant. And yet, there was something about Ava's plea, about her story, that hit too close to home. Samuel remembered being that child, the one with too many responsibilities, too much to carry. His mother had always told him to be strong, to keep his head up, to never show weakness. And now, looking at Ava, he saw the same pattern. She was trying to bear the weight of everything on her own, just as he had. And just like him, she didn't know how to ask for help. A few days later, Samuel was sitting in his office late at night, the office dimly lit by the soft glow of his desk lamp. He had been working on some files, but his mind kept drifting back to Ava. He needed to understand more about her situation, to find a way to truly help. He had the resources, the connections, but what was missing? He knew that money alone wouldn't fix everything, and yet, he couldn't stop thinking about the one thing he had failed to give his own mother in her final days: emotional support, love. Ava, just like him, needed more than just the practical help. She needed someone to truly see her, to care for her as a person, not a problem to be solved. Then, as if on instinct, he picked up the phone and called the hospital where Clara was being treated. He wasn't sure what he was asking for, but he knew he had to find something more. He had to do more than just make the necessary calls for the transplant. He had to ensure that Ava had more than just a chance at saving her mother. He had to give her the emotional strength to believe in herself again. As he sat there, waiting for a response, Samuel realized something else. This wasn't just about a transplant. This wasn't just about saving Clara's life. It was about saving Ava's too. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you were forced to be the strong one, even when you didn't feel strong at all? How did you deal with it? Share your experience in the comments. Samuel made the decision then and there. He wasn't going to let Ava carry this weight alone. He wasn't just going to be the man who wrote the check and made the phone calls. He was going to be the person who showed up for her, the person who would help her rediscover her strength, just as she had helped him rediscover his. A few days after Samuel's promise to help, the small glimmer of hope that had ignited in Ava's heart began to grow. Samuel had arranged everything. The transplant was scheduled, the medical team was on standby, and the funds were in place. He had kept his word, and though the weight of the situation was still heavy on Ava, there was now a chance, a real chance, that her mother might live. Yet, as much as the logistics of the transplant had been sorted, there was something Ava couldn't shake: the feeling of being alone. Even with Samuel's promise, it was still just her and her mother against the world. The world, as she had come to learn, was full of people who would turn their backs when things got tough. Her father had died, her mother was sick, and now Samuel was the only person she could rely on. But Ava wasn't sure she could trust that. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate Samuel's help. She did, deeply. But he wasn't her family. He wasn't someone who had known her, who had seen her grow, who understood the world she lived in. He was a billionaire CEO who had offered to step in, to be the person who would make it all right. And for that, she was grateful. But there was still a barrier, one that she couldn't quite cross. For Samuel, the days following his decision to help were full of unexpected emotions. It was strange, feeling connected to someone else's pain. He had helped Ava, and he had followed through on his promises. But it wasn't just about the transplant anymore. It was about Ava herself. The more he saw her struggle, the more he found himself questioning his own past, his own choices. He wasn't used to offering comfort, not in the way that Ava needed. He had always given things, money, opportunities, resources. But this was different. He couldn't just give her money and walk away. He needed to be present. He needed to show her in a way that was far beyond words that he wasn't going anywhere. Samuel had always been a man of few words, preferring actions over sentiment. But with Ava, he realized that sometimes actions weren't enough. He needed to be open, to let her see that he wasn't the distant, calculating person he had always appeared to be. For the first time in his life, Samuel wanted to be someone who showed up, who made a real difference, not just in the world of business, but in the lives of the people who mattered. Ava, for her part, was beginning to notice the subtle changes in Samuel. He was still the same man, the billionaire CEO with the sharp suits and unyielding demeanor. But when he looked at her, there was something different. It wasn't pity or even concern. It was care. Genuine care. And yet, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that there was a distance between them, something that even his kindness couldn't bridge. She was scared. Scared that Samuel's help was just a temporary fix, that he would eventually grow tired of her just as others had. She had never known anyone who would stick around when things got hard. Her mother had always been there for her, but Clara's strength was fading. She had to be the strong one now, but she wasn't sure how to do that alone. It was a week after the transplant was scheduled, and Samuel invited Ava to dinner at a quiet restaurant, away from the public eye. He knew she hadn't eaten much since he'd promised to help, and he figured a quiet evening might offer them a chance to talk. They sat at a small table near the window, the evening light casting a soft glow over the room. Ava sat across from Samuel, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was hesitant, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Samuel, for all his wealth and confidence, seemed equally unsure. It was strange for both of them, sitting in silence trying to figure out how to bridge the gap between them. Finally, Samuel spoke. "How's your mom doing?" Ava's gaze dropped to the table, her fingers still clenched together. "She's getting worse. The doctors say it'll be a while before the transplant, but she doesn't have much time left." Her voice trembled and she quickly wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "I'm scared, Mr. Davidson." Samuel felt a deep ache in his chest at the sound of her vulnerability. "You don't have to be scared alone." Ava looked up at him, her eyes wide, as though she couldn't quite believe the words he had just spoken. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, thick with emotion. Samuel could see the weight of her world in her eyes, the same way he had seen it in his own reflection all those years ago. "I don't know how to be strong anymore." Samuel leaned forward, his voice softer now, more genuine than it had been before. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Ava. Sometimes it's okay to let someone else be strong for you." The words, simple as they were, seemed to break through the walls Ava had built around herself. She felt a warmth that wasn't just the comfort of the meal they were sharing. It was the warmth of someone reaching out, offering a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry it all by herself. As they continued talking, Samuel found himself opening up as well. He spoke about his mother, about the pain he had never really allowed himself to feel. He spoke of the emptiness that had followed her death, the way he had buried his emotions in work. Ava listened quietly, her eyes reflecting the understanding she had never thought she'd find in someone like him. Samuel wasn't perfect. He was just a man, carrying his own burdens, his own regrets. But in that moment, he wasn't the billionaire CEO. He was just someone who understood what it felt like to lose someone, and what it meant to try to rebuild, to try to find the courage to keep moving forward. Later that evening, as they walked out of the restaurant together, Samuel turned to Ava. "You don't have to do this alone, Ava. I'll be here, no matter what." Ava's heart swelled, the knot of fear that had tightened in her chest loosening just a little. She had wanted to hear those words for so long, but she hadn't known how to ask for them. "Thank you, Mr. Davidson." Samuel nodded, his voice steady but full of a tenderness he hadn't known he was capable of. "You can call me Samuel." Ava smiled, just a little. It was a fragile thing, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight. When was the last time someone made you feel like you weren't alone, even when everything around you seemed impossible? How did it change you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As they parted ways that evening, both Ava and Samuel knew that things had shifted between them. They weren't just two strangers thrown together by circumstance anymore. They were two people, bound by the shared weight of responsibility, loss, and hope. And together, they were starting to rebuild. One step at a time. Everything had seemed to be falling into place. Ava and Samuel had found a rhythm, a fragile but genuine connection built on mutual trust and understanding. Samuel had kept his word, arranging everything for Clara's transplant, and Ava had found herself leaning on him in ways she never imagined possible. For the first time in a long time, she believed in the possibility of something better, of a future where her mother would survive, where her family would be whole again. But as the days passed, a growing tension began to form between them, an undercurrent neither of them could ignore. Samuel, despite his kindness and support, was still the same man he had always been, emotionally distant, focused on his work, determined to keep his life compartmentalized. And Ava, despite her growth, still carried the burden of fear and uncertainty. She was torn between the overwhelming gratitude she felt toward Samuel and the quiet fear that he was just another person who would eventually walk away when the storm was over. It was a week before the scheduled transplant. Ava sat by her mother's bedside at the hospital, watching Clara sleep fitfully, her once vibrant face now pale and drawn. Ava had been spending most of her time at the hospital, barely eating or sleeping, keeping vigil over her mother as the transplant date loomed closer. The emotional toll was starting to show. Ava's shoulders slumped, her eyes were tired, and the weight of it all was beginning to feel unbearable. As she sat there scrolling through her phone, she saw a notification from Samuel. It was an email with a subject line that made her stomach drop. Changes to the transplant procedure. Ava's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly opened the email, her eyes scanning the words rapidly. The message was brief, but it was clear. Samuel had made a decision to delay the transplant. The reasoning behind it seemed logical. There were some complications with the donor's heart, and the procedure would need to be postponed for a few days to ensure everything was aligned. Ava's hands shook as she read the message again. A delay? Her mother didn't have a few days. Her time was running out. Her chest tightened, and a wave of panic hit her like a punch. She didn't know what to do, who to turn to. Samuel had promised. He had made it all sound so simple, so certain. But now, he was changing the timeline without consulting her, without even giving her a warning. Ava's mind raced. She felt the betrayal, cold and sharp as if something she had trusted, something she had put all her hope in, had slipped out of her grasp. The message felt like a cruel joke, a cruel twist of fate. The only person who had seemed like a lifeline, the person she had come to depend on, had made a decision that could cost her mother's life. She didn't wait another moment. Ava left her mother's side, her legs weak beneath her, her breath shallow as she rushed toward the hospital exit. She had to see Samuel. She had to confront him, to demand answers. She wasn't going to let him take her hope away, not without a fight. As she stepped into a taxi, her mind was a storm of emotions. She tried to calm herself, to think clearly, but it was hard. She had spent so many sleepless nights imagining this day, this moment, but never like this. Never with the feeling that the one person who had promised to help her was now turning his back on her. When the taxi pulled up outside Samuel's office building, Ava didn't even hesitate. She stormed through the lobby, her face flushed with anger and fear, her fists clenched by her sides. She barely registered the receptionist's confused expression as she entered the elevator, pushing the button for the top floor. Samuel was in his office, sitting behind his desk, his phone in hand, when the door burst open. Ava stood there, her chest heaving, her face pale but filled with fire. She didn't give him time to speak. She was already in motion, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "You can't do this. You promised me. You promised my mom you would make sure the transplant happens." Samuel stood up, startled by her sudden arrival, but he quickly composed himself, his usual calm demeanor returning. He walked toward her slowly, his expression unreadable. "Ava, please, calm down. There's been a complication with the donor heart. It's the safest thing to delay the procedure." Ava's heart raced, her emotions swirling, a sharp pain cutting through her chest. She had trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in years. And now, he was making decisions for her mother's life without consulting her, without giving her a say. "You can't just decide this without talking to me. You're not the one who's sitting in that hospital room waiting for my mom to die." The words hit Samuel harder than he expected. He knew he had been distant, that his professional approach had come across as cold, but he hadn't expected Ava to lash out like this. She was right. He hadn't considered her perspective, her pain. He had made decisions in the sterile, controlled environment of his office, but he hadn't taken the time to think about what it meant to her. "I'm sorry, Ava. I never meant to hurt you." But the apology felt hollow in the face of her anger. Ava shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes, her voice breaking with frustration. "You don't understand. You don't get it. This isn't just about money or schedules. This is my mom's life." For a moment, there was silence between them. Samuel's usual defenses began to crack, the hard exterior he had built up over the years starting to erode. He had promised her. He had made a commitment to help, to be there when it counted. But now, as he looked at the pain in Ava's eyes, he realized that the promise he had made wasn't just about money or logistics. It was about something far deeper. It was about being there when it mattered most. Ava turned away from him, her fists clenched at her sides as she tried to hold back her tears. She had given him everything, her trust, her hope. And now it felt like it was all slipping away. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep relying on someone who doesn't even care enough to include me in the decisions. I'll find another way." Samuel stepped forward, his hand reaching out, but Ava shook her head and backed away, her eyes never meeting his. "I don't need your help anymore." And with that, she walked out of his office, leaving Samuel standing alone, the weight of his mistakes crashing down on him. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted broke their promise? How did it make you feel? Do you think forgiveness is possible when trust is shattered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As Ava left the building, her heart heavy with hurt and disappointment, Samuel stood motionless in his office, the silence overwhelming. He had made a mistake that could cost him not just his connection with Ava, but the chance to make things right. Now he would have to figure out if there was any way to fix it before it was too late. Ava's world had been torn apart. What had started as a fragile hope an unexpected lifeline offered by Samuel, now seemed like an illusion, a temporary reprieve from the crushing weight of her reality. She had trusted him. She had allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something better, something that could save her mother's life. But with one decision, one moment of neglect, Samuel had shattered everything. As she walked out of his office, her steps felt heavy, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on her. She didn't know where to go, what to do next. The hospital was just a few blocks away, but it felt miles away. Her heart ached for her mother, lying helpless in that sterile room, and for herself, lost, alone, unsure of what to do now. She wanted to believe Samuel was different. She wanted to believe he was someone who would keep his word. But the decision he had made, without her input, felt like a betrayal, one she couldn't ignore. As she made her way to the hospital, her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. She thought of her mother's pale face, the fear in her eyes, and the endless days spent waiting for something to change. But now, everything was more uncertain than ever. Samuel stood in his office, still reeling from the confrontation with Ava. He had never felt so powerless, so unsure of himself. He had thought he was doing the right thing, that his decision to delay the transplant was the best one. But now he realized how wrong he had been. Ava wasn't just a client or a business transaction. She was a person, a child who was carrying the world on her shoulders. And in that moment he had failed her. He knew he couldn't undo what had been done. The words had been said, the hurt had been caused. But what he also knew, deep down, was that he couldn't walk away. Ava had trusted him, and now it was his turn to prove that trust wasn't misplaced. He had to find a way to make things right. He grabbed his coat, his mind set. He wasn't going to let her walk away from him. Not like this. Not without doing everything he could to show her that he could be the person she needed him to be. As Ava entered the hospital, her heart was racing. She couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the sense that everything she had worked so hard to hold together was slipping away. Her mother was still unconscious, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily in the background, the only sign of life in the sterile, silent room. She sat by Clara's side, her hands gently holding her mother's. Ava had always been the one to protect her, the one who had kept the dark thoughts at bay. But now, she felt like she was losing everything. Her mother, the hope that had been offered, and even herself. The weight of the decision she had to make, of how she would move forward, was almost too much to bear. But there was one thing she couldn't do: give up. She couldn't just sit there and let everything slip through her fingers. She had to keep fighting for her mom, for herself. Even if Samuel had hurt her, even if she felt betrayed, she couldn't stop trying. Samuel stood outside the hospital, unsure of what he was about to do. He had spent the last few hours trying to reach Ava, calling her, sending texts, but there had been no response. He knew she was hurt, angry, and confused, but he also knew that if he didn't do something, he might lose her forever. He entered the hospital with purpose, moving past the reception desk without speaking. He didn't need to announce himself. He knew exactly where Ava would be. The hospital had become a place of shadows and sterile rooms, a place where nothing felt alive except for the people who were fighting to survive. As he walked down the corridor, his eyes caught sight of her, Ava, sitting alone in her mother's room, her hands clasped together as if holding on to the last thread of hope. He hesitated, just for a moment before approaching her. His voice was steady, but his heart was pounding in his chest. Ava. She looked up, her face a mix of emotions, hurt, exhaustion, and a deep, raw sadness. She didn't say anything at first, but her gaze was piercing, as though she was searching for the sincerity in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of everything she had been holding inside. "I came to apologize. I made a mistake, Ava. I didn't think about how my decisions would affect you and your mom. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I can see now that I was wrong. I didn't mean to hurt you. I should have consulted you first. I should have been more present. Ava's breath hitched, the weight of his words slowly sinking in. She didn't respond right away, but her eyes softened, just a little. I don't know if I can trust you again. I understand. I don't deserve your trust, but I'm asking for it anyway. I know I've failed you, but I want to make things right. I want to be here for you and your mom, no matter what. Ava looked down at her mother, her heart torn between the anger she still felt and the fragile hope that Samuel could be the person he had promised to be. She wanted to believe in him. She really did, but the fear of being let down again was overwhelming. Samuel sat down next to her, close but not too close. He didn't want to pressure her, but he also knew that he couldn't give up on her now. I'm not going to walk away, Ava. I made a promise and I'm going to keep it. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ava allowed herself to hope again. Her heart still ached, still carried the weight of so many unanswered questions, but in that moment, with Samuel sitting next to her, she knew she wasn't alone. The hours passed slowly, but there was a change in the air. Ava and Samuel, though still guarded, found themselves talking more openly, discussing the next steps for Clara's surgery, the challenges they would face, and even their own fears. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the same as before. But it was progress. It was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Ava felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Trust. She still didn't know if she could forgive Samuel completely, but she knew that for the first time, he was willing to meet her where she was. No walls, no defenses, just two people trying to find their way through the darkness. As night fell, the transplant procedure was back on track, the delay lifted, and Clara's surgery would happen as scheduled. But more importantly, Ava and Samuel had reached a crossroads, a moment where both of them would have to make a choice. Would they let the past define them, or would they choose to move forward, together? Have you ever had to decide whether to forgive someone who hurt you? How did you make that choice, and what was the result? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Samuel stayed by Ava's side as she leaned against her mother's bed, the first real peace she'd felt in a long time settling over her. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, but tonight they had made a choice. They would keep going, together. The following morning, Clara was wheeled into the operating room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of calm in the hospital room where Ava and Samuel sat side by side. The tension that had hung between them was finally beginning to lift. Though the weight of the situation was far from gone, there was still a long road ahead, still the uncertainty of what the surgery would bring. But something had changed. In the hours since their conversation the night before, Ava had made peace with the decision she had to make. Not just for herself, but for her mother and for Samuel. She had allowed herself to open up again, to trust again. It hadn't been easy, and she wasn't sure it would be in the future. But at that moment, Ava realized that trust wasn't something you could just throw away. It had to be rebuilt, step by step. And for the first time, she believed that Samuel was trying to do just that. Samuel had spent the night reflecting on his actions. He had taken responsibility for his mistake and had done everything he could to make it right. But more than that, he had shown Ava something that he had buried deep inside for years: vulnerability. In those quiet moments when it had been just the two of them, he had finally allowed himself to be honest about his fears, his past, and the mistakes that had shaped him. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but he had learned something important. Love, empathy, and connection were not weaknesses, but strengths. As the hours passed, the hospital staff moved with quiet efficiency, and the room where Ava sat grew heavier with time. Samuel didn't try to talk, didn't try to fill the silence. He simply sat beside Ava, offering the comfort of his presence. In some small way, it was more than Ava had ever expected from anyone. "How are you holding up?" Ava looked at him, her expression still tense but softer than before. She had thought she would resent him forever. She had thought that she would never forgive him for the pain he had caused. But now, with Clara in surgery and her heart filled with a fragile hope, she realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to move forward. I'm scared, but I'm okay. Samuel nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of those words. He couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the mistakes he had made. But he could be here now, in this moment, with Ava. And that was something. Several hours later, a nurse entered the room with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The uncertainty was still there, but the relief in her face was unmistakable. The transplant was successful. Clara made it through. Ava's breath caught in her throat, and for a brief moment she couldn't breathe. The room around her seemed to shift, the weight she had carried for so long finally lifting off her shoulders. She looked over at Samuel, her eyes wide with disbelief. She made it? Yes. She's in recovery right now. The doctors will be monitoring her closely, but everything looks good so far. Ava couldn't hold back the tears any longer. They spilled over, a mix of relief, exhaustion, and overwhelming gratitude. She had fought so hard to keep going, to keep her hope alive. And now, in this moment, she realized that the fight wasn't over. But it was the beginning of something new. Samuel stood beside her, his presence a quiet support as she wiped her tears away. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. His actions had spoken for him. He had been there when she needed him most. And that was enough. I don't know what to say. I thought I was going to lose her. I know, and I know I let you down, but I'm not going anywhere, Ava. I'll be here for both of you. For the first time, Ava saw the truth in his words. Samuel wasn't perfect. He wasn't a knight in shining armor. But he had come through when it mattered. He had shown up. And that was something Ava had never imagined she would find in someone like him. It wasn't just the wealth, or the power, or the promises he had made. It was the way he was showing her, every step of the way, that people could change, if they really wanted to. Over the next few days, as Clara recovered in the hospital, Ava and Samuel spent more time together. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of silence, moments when the past seemed to hang heavy in the air. But with each passing day, they grew closer. Samuel didn't push her, didn't try to rush the process. He simply let Ava set the pace, letting her open up when she was ready. It was a slow rebuild, but it was a rebuild nonetheless. One evening, after another long day of waiting, Ava turned to Samuel as they sat outside the hospital, the evening sky painted with streaks of pink and purple. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing. I'm not doing this alone anymore. Samuel looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. You never have to do it alone, Ava. Not anymore. For a moment, they simply sat in the silence, the weight of the past and the hope for the future lingering between them. There was still so much unknown, so much that could go wrong. But for the first time in a long time, Ava felt a sense of peace. It was fragile. Yes, but it was real. She had learned to trust again, and that was the first step toward healing. In the weeks that followed, Clara continued to improve. The transplant had worked, and her recovery was nothing short of miraculous. As she regained strength, Ava found herself spending more time at her side, laughing, talking, and slowly letting the world feel a little less heavy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when Ava would catch herself wondering if it was all real, if the good things she was feeling would last. But as she looked at Samuel, standing by her side, she realized something important. Sometimes, the greatest gifts came when you least expected them. Samuel, too, had changed. He had learned how to be present, how to be vulnerable, and though he wasn't perfect, he was here, by Ava's side, supporting her, helping her rebuild the pieces of her life that had shattered. For the first time in his life, Samuel allowed himself to care, truly care, about someone other than himself. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything seemed hopeless, and then something or someone came along to change everything? How did that moment shape who you are today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As Ava and Samuel stood together by Clara's hospital bed, watching the woman they both loved slowly regain her strength, they knew this was just the beginning. The journey ahead would be long, filled with its own set of challenges, but they would face it together. Ava had found more than just a promise of help. She had found a new family, one built not on wealth or status, but on love, trust, and the willingness to be there when it counted most. And Samuel, for the first time, had found a reason to believe in something more than just success. He had found something worth fighting for. Together they would face whatever came next, stronger, united, and ready to embrace the future. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.